Welcome everyone to the Penny Stamps Distinguished Speakers Series. And we are so pleased to have with us today graphic designer Paula S NY. As I can see from the turnout, you all are too. I want to thank our partners on today's program for their support, AIGA Detroit, the Professional Association for Design, and our series partners, Arts at Michigan and Michigan Radio 91.7. AIGA has a table in the lobby with information, so you can visit that on the way out if you didn't on the way in. Also available on your way in, you may have picked up, there were some bookmarks, and those bookmarks are from Arts on Earth and highlight a number of events that they have coming up between now and November 6th. Our lecture in the Penny Stamp series on November 5th will also be part of that, Arts and Bodies, exploring how arts and bodies inspire each other. Another thing that you may or may not have gotten on the way in, there were little orange tickets on the table. And this was a special treat from the Michigan Theater, specifically for art and design folks and Penny Stamps attendees. These are free tickets to, the Michigan Theater is showing Nosferatu, the 1922 classic silent film with live organ accompaniment by Dr. Stephen Ball at 7:30 next Thursday, directly following the lecture. So if you got one of those orange tickets, you can come for free. Otherwise, it's $15 a pop. There will also be more free tickets available as you enter the lecture next week if you did not get one this week. So thank you to the Michigan Theater for that. I want to say hello to folks that are here from far-flung regions today. Across the state, I know we have student visitors from Saginaw and from Grand Rapids, and all across the Detroit region. I know we've got some Detroiters in the audience. So welcome. The series is here every week. Please join us again. So happy to have you. Other special guests I want to introduce today, coming from further afield even than the state. We have in our midst today, and with us for the next couple of days at Art and Design, our Dean's Advisory Council. They gather here once a year and work on important things going on at the school and create initiatives and make sure that the whole system's working well for everyone. We can't thank you enough. If we could have the house lights up. Rico? House? I know we have a couple DACers here, and you're somewhere in the middle. If you guys could just stand up for a minute so we can see who you are, that would be much appreciated. Thank you so much. And you can keep the house lights up for a second, Rico. There's another very special person that I would like to, that I'm honored to welcome to be here with us today. She is part of the Dean's Advisory Council. She is also the namesake and patroness of this series. Miss Penny Stamps herself is with us in the audience. If you could stand, Penny. Stand up. Penny Stamps. For those of you who don't know much about Penny, one thing I can say, she is a woman of vision in philanthropy, and her philanthropy touches many, many areas across education and in the art world and in the civic world as well. And one thing that I feel so fantastic about with this gift that she gave us of this series is that all three of those worlds, education, art, and civic, meet here in the theater every week. So thank you so much, Penny, for bringing us here today, for having Paula with us today. And now to properly introduce Ms. Schur to you, it's my pleasure to present Art and Design undergraduate and budding graphic designer himself, one of our Art and Design students, Mr. Ben English.
The name's actually pronounced Cher, Christina. In her almost 40 years as a designer, she has made an indelible mark on the visual landscape of New York and the world at large. She has done all the things you expect: identity and branding, packaging and publication, promotional material and environmental graphics, but never in the way you expect. For me to convey now the breadth and impact of her work, however, would be a poor substitute for the medium. I will say her experimental work with typography has yielded some of the most kinetic, two-dimensional graphics in the visual mainstream. She has been called an unabashed populist and has an extreme distaste for Helvetica. We'll have to agree to disagree. She maintains a healthy relationship with failure. If you don't know what not to do, you'll never know what to do, and it seems she's figured that out. She's in the Art Directors Club Hall of Fame and an AIGA and a Type Directors Club medalist. It's an honor to introduce her. Please help me welcome Paula S. NY.
It goes this way, doesn't it? The state of Michigan? No. Is it this way? Which? This way? No, yes. No, yes. Thank you all for coming, and I just want to announce now that after my speech there'll be a Q&A and we move to another room and somebody will give directions, but right now I'm going to talk to you about what influences me probably more than anything else in my work, which is the city of New York, where I've lived for 38 years. I'm not a native New Yorker. I was born in Washington, D.C., and I moved to New York 38 years ago with a portfolio and began living and working there. And the city has impacted everything I do. It impacts me physically. I mean, I feel the city. It impacts me emotionally and also romantically. And I want to demonstrate how that actually manifests itself. At first, it was unconscious, and then I became aware of it in the past 5 or 10 years. So I'll just begin here. You've all seen this, actually. This is from West Side Story. New York City is a vertical grid of buildings all next to each other, almost no daylight coming in sometimes in between the buildings. I live and work in Lower Manhattan in an area near the Flatiron Building, and I actually am about 5 blocks south of this Empire State Building. And I began to notice, for some peculiar reason, in a lot of my work, I began using very tall, big, long, skinny typography, always in all caps, and I was doing it year after year after year. I always seemed to be drawn to it in things I designed, and then I suddenly realized they were buildings. I did a poster in 1979 that was really emblematic of the way I would work for years. That was called The Best of Jazz. And people thought it was influenced by constructivism at the time I did it. And I looked at it, I guess 5 or 6 years ago, and realized it was a grid of New York City. I work for lots and lots of city agencies. I'm very involved in the city. I'm a New York City commissioner, and I actually go down to City Hall every other week and make decisions about what things look like and what should get built and how they should be modified. And I design for city organizations. This is was a beginning of a identity system for a company called Ballet Tech that was designed to be read from a subway train. The work I do always seems to have some kind of urban base to it. It always is sort of hard beating and loud, like the city I live in. And again, you'll see the verticality in it. You're looking at dancers over a architectural lighting plan for the Joyce Theater, where this dance company performs. And these upside-down dancers start to become very architectural in their form. The work I did for the New York Shakespeare Festival, which we changed the name to the Public Theater, was always sort of big and tough and really urban. It was an identity that was movable, that was composed out of using these very big, very strong, powerful wood typefaces. that were used in different weights and proportions. And as I look at them now, they were just more ramifications of New York City, even when they were human. Here you have a Shakespearean play of the War of the Roses that's actually tough. Typography that's all about structure. And probably my most urban piece of work, which was the campaign for Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk in the 90s, which was a tap rap musical, and was about dancing and noise in New York City. And the typography itself seems to make noise. It lived the best out on the street where people ripped it or wrote on it, and it became part of the fabric of the city itself. When we did this subway poster, we figured, oh God, people are going to write all over the white area. Maybe we should fill it up. And then we thought, no, just let them contribute to the poster. It'll be part of the art. Nobody did, though. That was sort of interesting. Here we filled it completely up. Sometimes I do it in handwriting, and it still comes out relatively architectural. I don't know why. I don't really control it. When I try to use upper and lower case, for some reason, the stuff gets big and heavy, and it still becomes buildings. I've been doing the public theater work for 14 years. I've changed the identity, or at least the sensibility of the identity, 3 times. And every time I change it, it still comes out looking like the city. Everything is still structured. Even if I add a lot more white space and make everything smaller, there's still some kind of New York City impact. This was this year's poster. Just to rebel against myself, I made the logo horizontal, but it still looks like the city. This is the program, materials. Still very urban after 15 years. And structured. I was asked by a printing company to make posters for sale, and I thought, well, I'll make the numbers 1 through 0, and then you could buy your address, or you could buy your phone number, or your birth date, or whatever you wanted, and hang them together. And they came out like New York City, too. Sort of big, black and white, tough, architectural. I didn't determine this. It just sort of seems to happen all by itself. That's the 4, the 5, the 6, the 7. That's made out of 1,000,000 sevens, that's 7. The 8, my favorite. 9, and the 0. Somebody asked me to make a big comma. Here it is. I had a show in Japan, and I was asked to make a poster for myself, and I picked the most sort of Eastern color system and softness and scale and space around the poster, and somehow it still came out looking like New York City. I tried script, but it still came out looking like New York City. I love making giant letter forms. If I have to, I'll paste it together. This was a calendar I did for the country of Serbia. There's a Serbian printing company that makes a very famous calendar in their country, and I came to Serbia and I was a huge celebrity for contrasting the Cyrillic alphabet with the Latin alphabet. Again, architectural. I love playing with letter forms because they are like buildings. This is actually a page where you can read the mouths, and they make, it makes an alphabet. It's an alphabet out of heads with mouths moving that actually makes sentences. This is a merge of an N from the Cyrillic alphabet, and I think it was a K, and from the Latin alphabet. Here's how the merge got made. I did a study of cartoon words and discovered that actually they have exactly the same words. They're pronounced differently, but they mean the same things, the same amount. I merged the letters together 3-dimensionally and created a formula for it so you could actually build it. We took common sayings like eye for an eye and overlaid one word over another. comparing and contrasting two alphabets. And when I do ballet for New York City, it still comes out, even at Lincoln Center, sort of urban and tough, you know, stacked letter forms, still very vertical, one over the other. Even when I worked for the Museum of Modern Art, New York just sort of crept into it. This is a new way of, they promote themselves now, which was a system we designed just last year. Still very urban, still very structural. The other way New York affects me really comes from Hollywood and not New York City itself. It has to do with the romance of your name in lights and living in New York and how you feel about the possibility that anything could happen, that you could come to New York just a starstruck kid and walk away a famous movie star. So the most influential film titles for me that did this was from a 1936 movie called My Man Godfrey, and I'm going to play it now. Doesn't get any better than this. I don't know why New York City doesn't really look like this. It seems like it should. I always thought that cities have the advantage of being incredibly romantic and heroic at every turn. And I'm always sort of frustrated by the fact that people are sort of holding back in fear of, you know, provoking bad taste. But this influenced me a heck of a lot. This is the fanciest hot dog stand in New York City. It's called Shake Shack. It's actually across the street from my office at Pentagram. And I began doing this sort of heroic, oversized typography because it seemed to fit so well with the scale of the city. And when I began to design environments, I felt like that the sign should be as heroic and romantic as the building. This is the Children's Museum in Pittsburgh, where type is extruded. It's about 2.5 feet deep, and it's made out of plastic and metal, and it's rimmed in neon, and the neon charges through perforated metal. This is a donor's wall that's also made out of plastic, just really cheap pieces of lucite that we glued. We had a glue that had invisibility, and we glued the plastic dowels to the glass wall like that. And everybody was worried that the children were going to pull them off the walls. So first we thought we'd put up a rope around it, and then we found out that, well, it really only cost $8 to replace one of these things, so we figured let them pull it off. Actually, nobody did. This is my favorite bathroom sign I ever did. All of this comes from sort of a sense of theatricality that is the idea of what something can be in public space. You know, it comes from the notion of your name in lights, theater. This is New 42nd Street Theater. It's a rehearsal studio for actors and actresses in New York City. And it's really very much like a sort of a utopian place for actors and actresses to find themselves. So we built a kind of Dutch building. I worked with an architect named Charles Platt, and the building was de stijl, and so was the typography. We used the floor as the sign system because actors and actresses take their cues from their looking at the floor, and all New Yorkers also look down at their feet when they walk. So I found actually that the sign system on the floor functioned better than a lot of other sign systems I'd done in public spaces. It just is amazing how you read typography in space. I do this by, building funny models and seeing what would happen with it. Sometimes there isn't enough space to get all the type on. This is the storage closet on the 3rd floor. The stairwell, obviously. You forgive type. You read it around corners, because once you understand where you are and you see the beginning of a word, it's easy to follow. This is the entrance to the Duke Theater. And the hallway, I think, was 12 feet wide by 30 feet long. And the walls were covered with bumpers that covered the typography, but you could still read it in the space. It was absolutely amazing that you could read that way. This is Symphony Space in New York City. It's another theater, and very much inspired by the movie I showed you earlier. The typography is punched out of stainless steel and backlit with LED, and it glows through it at night and creates a totem of information. And all the messaging inside the theater is punched out stainless. Donors' walls, and the exterior of the theater. Jazz at Lincoln Center is another identity I did. I've actually done almost all of the Lincoln Center identities. I've worked my way through them. When I designed the logo for this, Wynton Marsalis told me that jazz was really all about syncopation, and I didn't know what that meant. And he said it was a bunch of things in a row, and one thing was different. So he sort of handed me the identity and his description of jazz. Everything in the identity system is made out of circles and squares, even their murals and art. The typography is composed of circles and squares. The donors' walls are circles, backlit. This piece of trumpet art is made out of circles and squares. In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I was invited to create an identity for a section of town called the North Side. And I thought it was strange that they wanted me to do this. They were having problems getting pedestrians to walk from the center of the city over to the North Side because they had to walk under this underpass. And nobody wanted to walk under the underpass, so nobody went to that side of town. So they thought, well, maybe if they advertised it and they made an identity for it and they made logos for it, people would come. And I don't think anybody goes to a part of a city because it has a logo. I just don't think that works. I think people may go to a clothing store because of the logo, but I don't think they'll go to a part of town that way. So I thought what they really needed to do was address the bridge. And I was supposed to go out to Pittsburgh and make a presentation of a bunch of identity ideas for the part of town, and I didn't. I just ignored the brief and thought, well, they'll either love it or hate it, and if they hate it, it's Pittsburgh and I'll never go back again. So I took the bridge and I said, well, why can't the bridge be sort of an art installation in and of itself? Why can't you light the bridge? Why can't there be crazy neon on the bridge? Why can't there be walk signs under the bridge? And I did end with this, and it was in the Pittsburgh, front page of the Pittsburgh paper the next day, and they're making it as we speak. So it is their identity. This is another similar situation. This is all about romance, really. I mean, if you look at cities and you think of them as romantic, exciting places, you begin to bring this stuff to it because it's natural. It's as if the city demands it. This is a building that was purchased by the Lucent Technology Company for the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, and it was given to the New Jersey Performing Arts Center as a place, as a high school, a public high school for performing arts. And there was really no money to fix it up, and it's a pretty depressing looking place in Newark, and I thought, I wouldn't want to go to high school there. I mean, that really looks grim. And they came to me, they didn't have an architect, and they didn't really have any money to fix up the building. They had a smallish budget, and I thought, well, with that budget, the only thing they could really do to the building is paint it. So we painted it, and we covered it with a listing of what went on inside the building, which is words, just simply covering the building with words. This building is now nearly 10 years old. There's not a graffiti mark on it. It's really wonderful that people will respect something if it brings some joy into the neighborhood. And I got the guys who painted it were guys who paint words on, you know, cinder block walls, words like flat fixed and stuff like that, you know, typical garage painters. And they took this job incredibly seriously because it was the best job they ever had. And they would get up on the scaffold and they'd call me up on their phone and say, you know, your type isn't lining up over here, and we really think we have to fix it. And I'd say, fine, you know, fix it. And they did it. My favorite part of the building was the air conditioning ducts, because they just became art. On a much more expensive scale was Bloomberg's headquarters. Bloomberg is essentially about facts and figures and stock reports and sports scores and all forms of statistics. It's essentially the world in numbers. So if you're going to be heroic about Bloomberg, numbers have to be the hero. What was nice was that if you took the word Bloomberg, it had 9 characters, and they had a lot of O's in their name, so they could be distinguished by the fact that you could make a digit system with a small O. If you took a local news feed on any given day of the week in typography, if it was normal news, it would be some kind of you know, GT credit rating lowered by nobody, or US upsets Mexico 2-0 or some such thing. And it would read pretty flat, but if the news was Bloombergian, it would probably look something like this, because the numbers would become the hero. So on that basis, we created a sign system and a digitized messaging system for Bloomberg's headquarters that are now used all over the world. And their directories are nothing but floor-to-ceiling numbers that are encased in glass, made out of resin and lit from the bottom, and they sort of glow and look really gorgeous and heroic. Here's the little 0. And they work in this sort of very beautiful modern space. When we first installed them, this is how the directories look when the type is overlaid on top of them. This is the lower level. It's an area. It's a cafeteria at Bloomberg headquarters. When we first put the type up, the glue that glues the letter form to the glass didn't hold, and the whole thing smashed and shattered all over the place. And I thought I was going to get sued and fired. And they were very kind about it. They said, well, accidents happen. You know, we sort of replaced the thing. But the formula's held. It's really kind of amazing. They look magical in the space. Everything is a series of overlays and numbers. In the hallways, the hallways are all, the stairwells are all different heights, because various floors in that building are different heights. So we picked the tallest height, and we made the numbers scale against the tallest height there was, and then when it didn't work, we just smashed them around. In the center, where you enter into Bloomberg's headquarters, is a giant LED structure that gives you the news on a typical news feed link that's at, you know, a 10-minute average that starts with national news and international news, and then goes into weather reports, stock reports, etc. And it's on a live feed from, you know, Associated Press. And originally, this LED that we designed was going to be a solid piece, and then we were told we had to cut 50% out of the budget. So we just cut strips out of the middle, and it actually made it better. You're looking at a movie of the feed in real time. It was digitized by programmed by my partner Lisa Strasfeld, and what it does is it takes the live news feed and it breaks it down so that the numbers are all heroic and large, and the movements are related to the content. So if the stock market's going up, the screen is green and the number goes up, and if the stock market goes down, the screen turns red. It was really actually not such a great move for them, because during the stock market crash, the building was red for about 70,000 days, and everybody wanted to kill themselves. Here's a weather report. I think it's about to be really, really hot in Madrid. Here it comes. Yikes. There are smaller ones through the building that function the same way, but they're not quite as dramatic as the large-scale one. And this is what happens when the stock market's going down. Yay, happier times. And here's the building as seen from 58th Street between Lexington and 3rd Avenue where it sits. And you can see the screen from the window, and you can read the report, even though the screen is broken up because the scale of the typography is so huge that it mitigates the split in the screen. The third way I'm influenced by New York City really has to do with the mass of humanity that lives there, and sort of layering of information on top of communication, on top of people arguing, on top of little sidebar trivial things that are going on all at the same time. It's a cacophony of sounds, frustration, and humanity that I love and miss when I'm away from it. And I think best captured for me in this little clip from a movie called Network, which was about the media. And I'll just show you this little clip of people yelling out a window.
I'm not gonna take it anymore! I'm mad as hell! I'm not gonna take it anymore!
I'm mad as hell! I'm not gonna take it anymore!
I'm mad as hell and I'm not gonna take it anymore!
I'm mad as hell! I'm mad as hell! I'm mad as hell! I'm not gonna take this anymore!
That's my little town. That's sort of how I feel about living in New York City. Actually, this poster was designed because somebody asked me to do a piece on the future of technology, and that was my response. I still believe that. I started really working with my hands in about 10 years ago, almost by accident. I had done a project for the AIGA because I was trying to keep the money, and I didn't want to have any expenses, and I started to fall in love with my own bad handwriting. And I started to make crazy charts. Sometimes I do them by hand, sometimes I do them with live typography. This was a diagram of the economy, which talks about uptimes, downtimes, stagflation, bear markets, et cetera. It makes a big figure eight, and in the center you get more taxes. And a self-portrait of myself here, which shows every boyfriend I ever had in my life, and all the hairdos, and a listing of my skin conditions, and various things that you don't need to know about me. Another piece that was a self-portrait that went into the New York Times, which was about all the numbers that are attached to you, and the numbers that are popping up in black. And actually, all the numbers in there are things that I have. They're my birth certificate, my social security number, my driver's license, my credit card numbers, my club membership numbers, my marriage license, my divorce papers, whatever I had. Whatever there was, it's on there, and it's in some computer someplace selling me stuff. Last year, I made this diagram of a blog thread that is, I think, quite accurate, so I'll read it to you, if I can read here. You start with an original thesis. Can you hear me? You start with an original thesis, and then the first contributor, the first poster on the blog, praises the thesis, and then everybody agrees to agree, and then everybody agrees with reservations, and then it ends sort of the deferential period of comments. And it moves into a little bit of negativity where somebody, somebody attacks the thesis and somebody says the thesis is stupid, and it devolves into irrelevant threads. And then they begin to denounce anybody who ever agreed with the thesis in the first place. And then they impugn the character of anybody who ever even talked to the author, agreed with the author, agreed with the thesis. And then you read this sort of point of ultimate repudiation. And then somebody plays devil's advocate, and somebody else takes both sides, and then somebody criticizes the character of the person who criticized the character of the writer, and then the dissenters all decide that they shouldn't dissent from the thesis because it's not right, and they agree to disagree, and then they sort of, make lighthearted comments, and then the whole thing fades into general boredom, and then it's the end. And if you take it and you lay it over any blog thread, you'll find the template works perfectly. I began to become obsessed after the 2000 election and the war in Iraq about what people said about the WMD. So I started writing down all the comments just from what I got in the press, and they've made this sort of this thing that looks like intestines that you're looking at right now. It makes for good reading if you ever have the time, because everybody was so dead wrong. I began creating diaries out of anger at what was going on politically, and I kept a diary of headlines from the New York Times. I made a piece of work that ran about 8 pages called All the News That Fits. And what it does is it starts with a general election of Bush and a little bit about him being contested, and then suddenly that headline story goes away because Clinton gets involved in a scandal with giving some kind of letting Mark Rich have some kind of, I forgot the word for it, he let him off the hook or let him out of jail or what? I can't hear you. No, that wasn't the word. Doesn't matter, doesn't matter. Then there was a spy plane incident in China, and that sort of wiped that out. And then there was a sex scandal with Gary Condon, in which nobody ever proved anything ever happened, but there was a girl who was dead, and they thought he was a murderer, but he wasn't a murderer, nothing happened. And then there were shark attacks, and then there was some sex and some sharks and sex. And then there was even more Condon, and the sharks ate the sex, and the sex went on, and the sex went on. And then all of a sudden at 9/11, there was this terror attack on the United States, and all the sex went away, and we went from sex to terror in about 1 week. So we went from sex to terror, WTC, Taliban, U.S. attacks Afghanistan, anthrax, more terror, high alert, Tora Bora, Osama, terror, dirty bomb, DC sniper, WMD, and then suddenly, somewhere in the end of the thing, Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Now that was really amazing to me because we went from Osama to Saddam in I think about 1 week. We went from Afghanistan to Iraq in a week, and I couldn't figure it out because when I went back on the headlines, if you go through the first part of the attack that went on for about 8 months, there's absolutely no mention of Iraq. So it sort of suddenly turns up in the middle of it, and I thought it was maybe a typo. Because, I think about things typographically, and if you think about it, Osama has 2 A's and Saddam has 2 A's. They both have an M. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they just confused it. But then we were in shock and awe, and it goes on and goes on and goes on. But what was fascinating to me about it was that as I was writing down the news headlines, and if you actually read the piece, all they are headlines from the New York Times with an underlying of whether or not the piece was about terror or about sex or about corruption, you find that the news stories never resolve themselves. They just get eaten by other news stories, and then they're eaten, we all forget about them, we go on to the next thing. Very interesting. At the same time, I began doing these sort of out-of-scale paintings of statistics and the world. And I started doing them in layers of information, almost the way I perceive information on the city streets of New York, where people talk over people, statistics and facts bombard you by media, and you start to perceive this world in this very inundated, very dense way. Here's Africa in black and white. These paintings the painting of Africa was 10 feet by 10 feet, and every single town in Africa that I could find on any given map was actually painted into the map. And what I love about painting these things is, aside from the fact that it's a very Zen-like experience, is that you really start to understand populations from looking at names of places and word derivations, and you understand how colonialized a place was. And you find out who was where, when, just by reading the names. The maps, these whole series of maps, here's Japan, were based on population density mostly. I was commissioned to do one that became an outdoor mural in New York City, and I'm sitting next to it to show you the scale of it. I painted this map. It was across the street from McCann Erickson, which is an advertising agency there, and it's cold in New York, and I thought everybody would want to look at the South Seas, so I gave them that. Here's the United States, and this was 14 feet wide by 10 feet high. It hung for about 6 months at the Cooper Hewitt, and I remember people walking up to it and pointing to a spot on the map and saying, "Oh, I've been there," and that's impossible because it's in the wrong spot. Almost all of the maps are inaccurate, but they're sort of right, which is interesting about using information. People take information literally. It's all wrong. My father was a map maker, and the first thing he taught me is that there's no such thing as an accurate map. It always depends upon the technology and the perception of the maker. So I decided to make my own. Here's Florida, and the results of the 2000 election are in the water. India is a sort of a big, fabulous pink Maharaji. When I painted Israel and actually had to try to fit the words of the places into the small area, I could understand the problem. This is layers of history of the Middle East. There are so many borders that have moved back and forth over time. When you paint with any map, and you don't have to go back very far, you find all the territory has always been in motion. My painting of the tsunami region in China. China was just great to paint, particularly when you were near the west coast of it, because the cities are so dense and they're so big and so heavily populated. They just one runs right into the other one. Really, really gorgeousness. My other favorite city, Paris, and the subway system. And I've painted Manhattan, my hometown, about 5 or 6 times. Here I painted it as zip codes, and all the zip codes are in the wrong places, of course. This was Manhattan at night. Manhattan has a subway system. It really gets great around 42nd Street. And Tokyo. Tokyo was actually a commission, which I actually didn't like doing because I had enjoyed painting places based on what I felt about them. And somebody commissioned Tokyo. It was a private commission, and I always thought I'd paint Tokyo because I've been there and I have a real feeling about it. But then the person who commissioned the painting sent me a drawing of her dining room where the painting was going, and it actually froze me up. I couldn't work on it because I felt like I was going to mess up her dining room. It was a really terrible feeling. But I finally got back into it, and I actually liked the result, and because I painted everything with lots of labels and this sort of very diagrammatic method that I used on another commission, which was for the city of New York. And this is a painting. There are actually 2 murals. This is the first one, which is finished, and I'm working on the second for a high school in Queens. There are 4 high schools in one building, and there's an area that is about 12,000 square feet that has an atrium and a skylight. And this wasn't designed to be a painting. It's actually a cartoon of something that'll be blown up and painted by other people and put on wooden panels and installed in the public space. I have a virtual reality demonstration of it. So that would be the skylight. It starts about 10 feet off the ground and goes up another 12 feet. The ceiling height's 22 feet. And it sort of moves around under the skylight. And I found I really liked combining the painting with the complete environment because it changes the nature of the painting, and you're sort of enveloped in all that crazy information. So I think this may be a new direction I'm going to start to pursue. But it's a very New York moment. I've made prints out of these paintings, which we sell, and what I like about them is flipping the color and seeing what happens to the imagery when you change the color of it. Just suddenly it changes the whole scale and shape and form of it. I've painted over the prints. I made paintings on top of the prints, and make them even more complicated. Here's a weather map or an airline map. And here's the world without any color at all. And thank you very much.